I'm Herrick the Mildly Perturbed. In my video on armor, I talked about counterplay. I said that it was like an arms race, when one person's actions forced another person to respond. Amtgard has a lot of abilities that just negate other abilities, like release or immunities, but just saying no to another player isn't really counterplay.
Now feel the fiery sting of my Tonfa of Takanoa! Hey kid, that knocks you down.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah, I got you.
Nuh-uh. Because my cloak is made of a titanium alloy that shields me from heat.
That's bullcrap. Titanium alloy, my ass.
Counterplay can also be viewed like asking, what's fun about getting hit by this ability? But what's fun about being frozen in place and just counting while you're out of the game? To put it mildly, Amtgard has a problem with counting and counterplay. Everyone knows standing around and counting isn't fun. V8 tried to address this by reducing all counts, which is just a band-aid. It doesn't actually solve the problem. And when V8 removed the live system, Frozen started to compete with death for inconvenience. Oftentimes, players would just take a death instead of dealing with certain types of crowd control. This undermines a lot of abilities, and it also undermines the whole point of swinging my weapon at you. If death isn't something to be avoided, what are we even doing? For the game to function, death needs to be the least desirable outcome of any interaction at all times. Now, I'm not saying that we go back to the live system. We got rid of that because it made noobs sit out for most of the game, and that's no fun. But there is a way that you can make death the worst outcome without making it any worse than it is now, by making death the only thing that takes you out of the game. Before I go into how to do that, let's define what good counterplay is. Good counterplay should increase player interaction and engagement. When you get hit, you should immediately have some idea of what to do next, and hopefully some options for how to go about doing it, just like a good boss fight in Dark Souls or Bloodborne. Good counterplay is not having abilities that hard counter other abilities. Monk immune! I call for nothing, Monk immune!
Han, can you stand for peace?
Monk immune. Missile block. Sanctuary. V9 has noticed the problem with immunities and tried to address it by replacing them with resistances, but I would submit that this isn't actually much better. Imagine a new player trying out an ability for the first time, and their target just says, resist. The defending player knows that they had to use a resource, but the noob who attacked them doesn't. Or even if they do understand resistances, it's not worth their time to deal with it because magic attacks are more costly and require more of a dedication than magic defenses do. In order for the game to be fast-paced and action-packed, balance needs to tilt in favor of aggression. Otherwise, there's no point wasting resources to overcome resistances. So immunities and Frozen don't have good counterplay. I'll start by addressing Frozen. How do we change crowd control? Well, Amtgard actually used to have a much better form of crowd control that was overlooked in the transition to V8. Traps stopped the target, but let them or their allies cut them free by striking their legs a certain number of times while chanting, "I free this leg." This felt a little bit silly, but let's look at what it did for gameplay. On a basic level, it means that the player isn't out of the game and doesn't need magic to start freeing themselves. It's more deadly than the current stop mechanics because the player would have to lower their weapons in order to free themselves, which opens up opportunities to attack them, instead of just having them hunker down and waiting for the spell to end. Moreover, this major crowd control essentially use it or lose it. If you put a trap on someone and run away, they'll be free in a few seconds instead of just standing around in an open field counting alone. But if you press your advantage in attack, you could keep them stuck for much longer and in a vulnerable state. You might even get a quick hit in on their allies if their allies come and try to free them. This is normally the part of the video where I say, now I'm not actually recommending that we go back to V6. But here, not only am I recommending bringing back Trap, I think it should be the model for all crowd control in the game. That is to say, I think that anything that forces a player to count should be replaced with giving that player a task to complete in order to remove their debuff. Trap is a fine replacement for Ice Ball and Entangle, but what about Heat Weapon? How about we change the narrative of heat weapons so that instead of the weapon becoming red hot, it bursts into flames. And now you can smother the flames by striking the weapon while it's on the ground, just the same way you would strike your leg to free yourself from a trap. Now, saying, I smother these flames or I free this leg over and over might feel silly, so instead of bringing back these wacky chants, let's find a more elegant solution. Amtgard already has a term to distinguish attacks from weapon strikes that aren't meant to deal damage, the light strike. So, let's say that to free legs or smother weapons you need to deliver 10 light strikes. Just chant light while you're swinging. Now, what about defensive buffs and immunities? I know I gave Monk a hard time earlier, but Missile Block is actually one of the coolest defensive abilities in the game. If I'm a new player and a Monk blocks my throwy with their hands, sure, they used an ability, and I can't do that, but I saw them blocking it, which means I know that if they didn't block it, they'd be dead. That tells me what to do next. I could kill them by being more accurate, or attacking when they're distracted, or maybe I could use a crowd control ability to make them more vulnerable. Even without having access to other abilities, I have an idea of what my next steps are around their defenses. That's good counterplay. I suggest that Missile Block should replace protection from projectiles, and Ancestral Armor, and Runic Armor, and some aspects of Stone Skin. I'm serious, anything that stops spell balls should work the same way. So what about verbal immunities and school immunities? Ready for this? Get rid of them. Why would you have a whole set of abilities and then design another set of abilities whose only job is to straight up negate the first set? If it's not fun to get hit by a certain verbal, that verbal shouldn't be in the game in the first place. Verbals should have built-in counterplay, just like the crowd control abilities that I described before. You shouldn't need immunities to deal with them. Immunities aren't counterplay. They're just...
Nuh-uh.
Yeah, that. In fact, I have a hypothesis that the reason a lot of players who love ditching don't like battle games is that in a battle game, the things you do don't always work, and that slows down the pace of the game. If abilities just did what they said on the tin, without...
Nuh-uh.
the game would be faster and much more fun. But that's a topic for a whole other video. For now, thanks for watching, and that's putting it mildly.